You are listening to The Art of Sales. Everyone sells every day, and this is your source for conversational, real-world sales and prospecting methods that you are comfortable using and that get results. You'll help people buy instead of pushing them into being sold. Here's your host, Art Subject.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome. Thank you again for joining us. And today we are in for a real treat. You are going to benefit greatly regardless of what you sell, how you sell, or even if you have sales in your title. Today's guest is Bob Burg, and I've known Bob for a long time, and Bob is most widely known for being co-author of the Go Giver series, and we're going to talk about that, specifically one of the Go Giver books here today. But a little bit about Bob. In their best-selling business parable, The Go Giver, and then the follow-up, The Go Giver Leader, today's guest, Bob Burg, and his author, John David Mann, challenged the conventional wisdom about success. And in the newest book that we're going to be talking about, they share an equally compelling story about the power of genuine influence in business and beyond. And the Go Giver Influencer, a little story about a most persuasive idea, tackles the paradox of achieving what you want by focusing on the other person's interests. Sounds familiar, right? And no, it's not in a self-sacrificial way, but rather in a way that all parties benefit from greatly. And this results in both immediate and long-term success. Now, Bob speaks all over the world on topics related to the Go Giver, as well as what he calls genuine influence, while his total book sales number well over 1 million copies. His and Mann's original book has itself sold over 850,000 copies and has spurred an international movement. And the new book that we're going to be talking about today, The Go Giver Influencer, might just be their most important book of all. Now, on a personal note, Bob genuinely walks his talk. He's probably the nicest human being that I know. I'm not kidding you. Bob, welcome.
Wow, that's quite a compliment and very hard to live up to. But I do want to tell you that, I was going to say it's just great to be with you, be with one of my mentors and teachers, and probably the person who I mention most on other podcasts, because people forever want to know how they can connect with people with this old tool we used to have called the telephone. Does that still work anymore? And I said, you know what? It does. And there's a guy I've got to introduce you to.
Well, see, that again, that's just an example of how nice Bob is, folks. He just actually demonstrated that, and it was genuine. So, Bob, thank you for that. And also, about the telephone, it's funny, when I give presentations, I'll pull my phone out and say, some of you might not believe this, but you can actually use these things to talk on, too.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So, Bob, we go back a long way, and I can't remember the first time we met a number of years ago. And at the time, actually, the Go Giver wasn't even in existence yet, but you had already made a huge name for yourself in sales and as the referral expert.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we had a book out called Endless Referrals many years ago, and that was it was a traditional how-to type of book, and it's done very well, and it's still out there, still bouncing around. But we sort of took the basic premise of that book, which was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust, and put that into the parable form, which eventually became the Go Giver.
Well, let's talk about that. So for those people who are listening and are not familiar, tell us just a little bit about the concept of the Go Giver and how actually that came into being.
Yeah. So, I had always loved reading business parables because I think as stories really connect with people. They connect on a heart to heart level. And when you can read a story that's brief and is entertaining and makes a point, you're a lot more likely to take in that information and apply it. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take that basic know, like, and trust premise of the Go-Giver of Endless Referrals and put it into a book. So the first thing I thought was, so what is the basic characteristic of a person who is able to develop those know, like, and trust relationships both quickly but also sustainably, which is so important. And I thought, well, they're always giving value. In other words, their focus is on bringing value to others. And so really, and then, of course, I asked John David Mann, who I knew as a fantastic writer and storyteller and a great entrepreneur in his own right, to be the lead writer and storyteller, because he's the guy who really made this book sing. And so the basic premise of the Go-Giver is simply that shifting your focus, and this is the key, shifting your focus from getting to giving. And when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing immense value to others. And that doing so is not only a pleasant way of conducting business, it's the most financially profitable way as well.
So the book is done phenomenally well, and it is amazing. It truly is. And you both have this gift of telling the story. The concept has been around. I mean, let's face it, for a while. I mean, Zig has the quote, you can get whatever you want if you help enough other people get what they want. Mm-hmm. But how did this thing just explode? To what do you attribute the success of it?
Sure. And, I'd go back to what you said, Art, and say that these principles have been around forever. I would say that so long as there have ever been market-based economies, it's been around. And that the people who were successful utilized all 5 of these laws. Now, they didn't always do it by learning them. Some of them just did it intuitively, right? They just need to find a way. Others learned them, but somehow they tapped into them. And the reason I'm saying that is because I wouldn't want anybody to even think that John and I invented these laws or are claiming to. We put them into story form, and maybe we delineated a little bit of what it was. But like you said, absolutely, what Zig said is perfect. So very true. And I think that people, and I think one reason why the book has done so well is because it came at a time when people really wanted to be assured that they could do business the right way, the way they really wanted to. Most people who sell a product or a service, they believe in that product or service. They know that they have immense value to share with others. They know that what they're doing is worthwhile, that it's worthy, that it helps people, and that they can also profit greatly from it, which they should. But I think that the teaching, not teaching, but the messages that we get from the world around us, is, the people who are wealthy did it on the backs of others, or they took advantage of others, or selling is about trying to convince people to buy something they don't want or need, which, of course, as you know, that's not selling. That's called being a con artist.
Right.
And so selling, as you and I and your listeners know, is simply discovering what the other person does want, need, or desire, and helping them to get it. And so when we look at sales from that frame, if you will, from that premise, we can feel really good about the fact that, that what we're doing is something that's very helpful and beneficial. And, I often, when I speak at a sales conference, I'll begin by asking the question, how many of you agree with the following statement? Nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet. And you're right, we all laugh just like that because we know it's true. No one's buying from us because we have a quota to meet. They're not buying from us because we need the money. And they're not even buying from us because we're a really good person who believes in what we do. They're buying from us because they believe they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And that's wonderful. It means that as the salesperson, we've got to place our focus on the right thing, if you will. Okay. And that's the other person. And I think people know that. They understand that intuitively, but they're told so often that that's not how it is that they don't know what to think. So I think this message resonated is really what happened.
Yeah. And going back to what we talked about before about the story aspect of it, and this was kind of what I was trying to get at, and that is, again, the message has been around forever, but the way in which you present it resonates because people like to put themselves in a story, and I think they can relate to the people that are in your stories, particularly in the Go-Giver influencer, and how that applies to so many of us as salespeople out there. So let's fast forward and let's talk about that book. And well, actually, explain that book and how that one came about after your first two, because then you had the Go-Giver Leader after that.
Sure. Well, the term influence has been a part of all of the books in the series. So there was in the original, The Go-Giver, there was law number 3, the law of influence. In the Go-Giver Leader, it was a story about the power of leadership and influence. And we decided to take the concept of influence and just kind of go deep with it in this book. And part of it was based on another book that I had written called Adversaries into Allies. And the rest was sort of Go-Giver principles and so forth and combined. And it was really because we felt that these days people have kind of, and we see this in political discourse all the time, right? Where people have stopped learning how, or have seemed to almost stop, respecting others in their communication. Politically, it used to be, I'm right, you're wrong, which was bad enough. Now it's, I'm right, you're evil. And so, but what happens is when you approach people that way and you see them as not having good intent, but rather having malintent and being evil for their views, even though they're usually not, then what happens is it totally breaks down communication or never allows it a chance to happen. Now, if we take that to the sales vernacular, as we do in the Go-Giver Influencer, it just means that we sort of stop understanding, or we never do understand each other. Because as you recall, Jillian and Jackson, who were the two protagonists, both had something the other person wanted. So when you think about it, it should have been right from the get-go, or from the give-go, it should have been a business marriage made in heaven. But it was anything but. In fact, every conversation they had with one another seemed to bring them even further apart rather than closer together. And that was, and neither one, if you recall, could just even understand why the other person was even thinking what they were thinking. And so fortunately, they each there were two mentors and two proteges in the story, and they each, unknowing to the other, had another mentor, and sort of learned how to understand each other and each get what they wanted.
And it's an amazing story, and everybody listening, I strongly encourage you to get actually all of the Go-Giver series, but especially this one, the Go-Giver Influencer. And in the book, Bob takes us through Bob and his co-author, takes us through the 5 secrets of genuine influence. And if you would, just go ahead and summarize those for us, Bob, because these are things that really are applicable not only to those of us in sales, but like you said, anybody who's communicating with anyone, whether it be in politics or with your kids or with the serviceman who's quoting your price. It applies in all areas of life.
Yeah. The 5 themselves, the first one is master your emotions. This is really where it all begins, because it's only when you can master your emotions, when you're in control of your emotions, in control of yourself, it's only at that point that you're even in a position to take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved. We all know this, and yet how often do we allow someone, based on what they say or do, to kind of push our emotional hot buttons, and we cause ourselves to become frustrated or helpless or a victim or angry, right? And we say or do something that is totally counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish, right? And we say, well, we know this, so why do we do it? And the answer really is because we're human beings. And as human beings, we're emotional creatures. It's how we're built. Now, we'd like to think we're logical, and of course, to a certain extent we are, but we're pretty emotion driven. We make major decisions based on emotion. We back up those decisions with logic. We rationalize, which really means nothing more than that we tell ourselves rational lies. And we do this to justify those decisions or those actions we took that we know we shouldn't have. So what we're not suggesting is that you deny your emotions or forego your emotions. First, that's contrary to human nature. You could not do that sustainably. But there's also no reason to do so. Emotions are fantastic. They're a wonderful part of life. They bring us joy. They make life worthwhile. No, just control. Make sure you're the master of your emotions rather than your emotions being the master of you. Or as one of my great friends, Don DeScumaci, puts it, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car.
So I can see how this is especially applicable in relationships of all types, but let's put it in a sales situation. So let's say a salesperson is negotiating with someone and they've had a couple calls, and then out of the blue, the prospect says, well, I think that we're probably going to go with your competitor because we heard some bad things about your customer service. So now the salesperson might get triggered by that because they know that there was some bad information being spread out there. So how would you suggest somebody handles that situation if the tendency is for their emotions to get triggered at that point and become a little bit irrational?
Yeah, that's really a terrific example. Because we know that at that point, if you let your emotions run you and you either get angry, right, and say, well, I can't believe you're doing that without asking me, you blah, 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 right? This person's never going to do, even if you're right, this person's never going to do business with you ever if that happens. Or if you go into defensive mode, right, and you say, well, wait a second, that's not fair because we didn't, well, again, it's going to be the same thing. You may be totally 100% right, but they're not going to respect that, and there's no chance. But what if instead you're able to maintain control of yourself, and you let that person finish what they're saying? You don't interrupt, as you would probably do, right? If you're letting your emotions get to you, you'd interrupt before they're even through, which is just going to make them angry. Okay, but instead you're in control of yourself. You let them finish. You let there be a second space. And you say, well, if I had heard something like that about someone I was about to do business with, I would really be concerned myself. May I ask you to share with me what you heard? Boom. And so now you're opening up dialogue. And this person has seen that you have posture, you have control, you're not defensive, which probably tells this person that maybe there's not all that, to it that I thought. And now you can engage in conversation where they can tell you exactly what they heard, and you're in a position to respond.
Well, really, it goes back to your original principle, which is making it all about them. And instead of us trying to retort with whatever answer we have or objection rebuttal, I'm putting that in air quotes, what we're really just trying to do is understand why they said what they do.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, you brought something up that's great, regarding, objections and so forth. And can I make a quick suggestion?
Yeah.
Well, we know that there are probably, 5 or 6, 7 objections that you're probably going to get every presentation. Now, we know that one way to help with that is to cover those within the presentation. But let's just say there are certain objections just as part of what you do that you pretty much know you're going to get. And if you have those all the time and you let yourself be surprised by them, you're much more likely, or even if it's a suggestion that comes out of nowhere, okay, and you and you're surprised by it, and you haven't controlled your emotions, you're going to answer in a way that's defensive. And that's never going to work out well, right? When you do that, we know that. So what if instead that you, or when you first start talking to this person, there's always something they say that seems to just get your goat, What if you instead practiced and you envisioned in your mind the typical, or even being surprised by an objection or something else that person says, or the person who tells you no, the person can't see you today, or they're not, and you practice instead of being emotional about it, you see this in your mind's eye and you practice being calm, being in control, letting that person finish, and then knowing that what you're going to say next. And you practice it just like an astronaut before going up into space on a mission. He or she would run hundreds and hundreds of simulations so that by the time they get up there, and something, heaven forbid, happens to the equipment or something, well, they've already practiced it. They know it. They've been there. They've done that. So now it's just, boom, I've done this before. This is what happens. So now when you're actually in the conversation with someone and they come up with that objection, or they ask you the same question 3 times, or they do something that typically you find your emotions getting out of control, well, now it doesn't, because now you've been through this. You've run these simulations. And now you're operating out of strength and control as opposed to a lack of such.
That is an awesome suggestion, because so often we as sales trainers, we being me, I'm not putting you in that category, suggest that salespeople practice the words and the techniques and how are we going to reply? What are we going to say? But even more important than that is what you had just mentioned, and that is what's going through our mind as we're doing it, because that's going to control what's coming out of our mouth and how it's coming out of our mouth. And it's kind of like a golfer working on their pre-shot routine prior to stepping up there and just pulling the trigger and doing what comes naturally, because that can make or break the shot as well. Great stuff. All right. What's the next point?
Well, the next one is to step into the other person's shoes. And this one sounds almost trite, Art, because we've all heard this one before. And, we've heard it a million times. Just step into the other person's shoes. Well, that sounds easy, but maybe it's not when you think about the fact that most of us have different size feet. And so literally we can't step into the other person's shoes. Figuratively, we can't step into the other person's mind. We don't know what they're thinking. Okay. But what happens as human beings, we all operate out of our own personal belief system based on upbringing, environment, schooling, news media, everything. And it's typically in place very, very young. And we grow up, we live our lives, controlled by an unconscious operating system that we're not even aware of. Okay. Well, here's the thing. So is this other person. But as human beings, we tend to think that other people see the world basically the same way we do. What else could it be, right? That's all we know, but it's not true. It's not so. And we don't know their likes and their dislikes. And this goes to selling. We may see something in our product or service, a certain benefit that we love, but that doesn't mean they would. Or something else is meaningless to us, but it would be important to them. So and I think one of the biggest mistakes salespeople make is selling the way we would buy, as opposed to making it about the other person. So, for example, so how would we know what this other person needs, what they want, what they desire? Well, we ask questions. And, you teach this so well in your approach about asking questions. And then after we ask, we have to listen, but not just listen with our ears. That's the surface listening that most of us do. That's listening in order to speak. That's letting them get in their 2 cents so that we can get in our 10 cents. Instead, what we need to do is listen with our eyes, listen with our posture, listen, as one of the mentors in the story says, with the back of your neck. In other words, place your whole being into listening to this person and really, really understanding them. And when you do this, 2 things happen. One is you do get to understand them. It's the only way we can understand another human who thinks differently, who acts differently, whose happiness, pursuit of happiness is different from ours. It's the only way we can learn what that is. And what also happens, though, is this person feels listened to. They feel heard. They feel cared about. They know their salesperson is interested in them, in bringing value to them, and that inspires trust.
And some people feel shocked by that because it happens so rarely.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah.
and that really is one of the biggest problems with salespeople, and that is just pitching what they want to pitch. And granted, the concept has been around forever, but yet it happens all the time. And just to piggyback on what you said there, one of the sayings that I use all the time is, yeah, we want to step into the other person's shoes, but we've got to take our own shoes off first.
Oh, that's beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So number 3.
Well, this is to set the frame. And this might be the most important concept of all. What is a frame? Well, a frame is the premise, if you will. The frame is the foundation from which everything else takes place. Let me give you a quick example of of what I was my favorite frame of all time. And it had nothing to do with business, and then we'll bring it to the business context. I was in a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant, and there was a little boy, a little toddler, probably 2.5 years old. He's walking around the restaurant when his parents call him over to their table. So he starts to walk over, and all of a sudden he slips and falls on the floor. Now, he didn't hurt himself. You could tell. But you could also tell he was very shocked. He was surprised. That was not within his realm of experience. So the first thing he did was he looked right at his mom and dad, the two people he trusts most, and as if to get their interpretation of the event. See, what happened. He wanted to know, what's next, and I think, Art, I'm pretty sure about this, that if had they gotten upset and panicky and oh no, my poor baby, are you okay? I think he would have started to cry. But what they did, the mom and dad just handled it so beautifully. They walked over hurriedly, of course, but very calmly. They had smiles on their faces. They had this wonderful attitude, and they smiled, they laughed, they applauded. They said, "Oh, what a good trick. That looks like so much fun." And immediately he began to laugh. Now, what the parents did is they set a productive frame from which he could operate. Okay. And we can do that whenever we meet someone, through what we say, through how we show up, our attitude, the smile on our face. It can be as simple as that. The question, though, is how do we reset someone else's already negative frame? And we maybe take an example of a customer we're about to sit down and do a sales presentation for. And she kind of comes to the table, kind of defensive and upset, and wants to let you know that she's not buying anything today, that she's not some easy sale, and who knows what's going on in her mind. And we really can't necessarily ask her necessarily and expect she's going to share that with us. But what we can do is, rather than buying into that frame, because if we do that, then it's, nothing's good going to happen, right?
Right.
But what we can do is we can reset the frame. We could say something such as, Mary, while we've been able to help a lot of people through this product, whether or not it's the right answer for you, we simply can't know without exploring deeper and determining whether it meets your specific needs. So please know this conversation is for both of us to discover that. And if it does, great. If not, that's okay too. So what we've done is we've reframed this from two adversaries to one of two allies, both looking for the same thing, and that is how it's going to work best for her.
So many examples where that is used. And I guess you have two choices when somebody says something. One is if it's coming from a negative perspective, just like you mentioned, we can either throw more fuel on the fire, which will cause them to defend their stance even more, or reset the frame. So another example in a sales situation would be an objection, and somebody just flat out says, look, it's not going to work for us. And one thing we always teach, and I know you teach something similar, is instead of coming back with that objection rebuttal is to just soften them a little bit. And what we like to teach is just simply replying, hey, that's okay. Hey, not a problem. Or, hey, I hear that a lot. And now they might be thinking, oh, okay. It's almost like they take a deep breath because the frame has been reset for them.
Exactly. They tell you it won't work. You might say, well, it might not. It's certainly worth exploring. Please tell me more.
Yeah.
Boom. And let them tell you, so any of those things. Exactly. And that's a reframe. That's all it is. It's a reframe. It gets the two of you working together as opposed to one against the other. Exactly.
Okay.
So number 4, is to communicate with tact and empathy. And, my dad has always defined tact as the language of strength. And I've always enjoyed that definition because to me, it really does take strength. It takes internal strength to not just, react emotionally to something we don't like and just, tell that person where it's at and what, or respond quickly to that email and just, no, it takes strength to determine what you're going to say, to not be emotional about it, to step into that person's shoes, to look at how we can set or reset the frame with what we're going to say. And so I think in a sense, tact is communicating an idea to someone that they're most likely predisposed not to like, but doing so in a way in which not only are they not defensive toward you and resistant to your ideas, but they're open to you and much more likely to be accepting of your ideas. And that's really tact. And empathy allows us to be tactful. Empathy, according to the dictionary, is the identification of or the identification with or vicarious experiencing of another person's feelings. But, Art, just like we back in secret number 2, just as we don't necessarily know what's in their mind, we can't necessarily know what's in their heart.
Right.
And so empathy is really not necessarily that you understand how they feel. You might not have any idea how they feel. And saying, I understand how you feel may come across as very inauthentic. But what it is it's communicating both by words, but also just by how you show up and the energy you're putting into it. It's communicating that, hey, I understand you're feeling something. And this something is distressful to you, and I'm here to help you with that. Can I give you a quick example?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's say, and I've utilized this with mortgage lenders when I've talked to them. Mortgage lenders are people who do a great service for people, and what they do though is every day they're asking people for very private information. Right? They're asking people they've just met to share all their financial information with them, which to the lender is no big deal. They do it all the time. But they're talking to someone who maybe is doing this for the first time or the second or third time in their life. Maybe this person's not proud of their financial situation, or they grew up being told by their parents, you never discuss money with strangers. So as you, the mortgage lender, you're doing this. If you're paying attention, right, and you're being empathetic, you can kind of sense that there's something about this that's making them uncomfortable. And here's where you can maybe say, and you use an I message in order to put the onus of the confusion on yourself. And you might say something like, it might just be me and my thought process, but I get the feeling that some of this may be making you a bit uncomfortable. And I just want you to know that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I do this every day. So to me, it's not a big thing to ask someone about their finances, but this is something that you may not feel very comfortable doing. So I just want to let you know, I see this all the time, and I'm here precisely for you to ask me any questions that I can help clarify.
And it really goes back to your point number 2, and that is step into the other person's shoes and trying to understand where they're coming from. And also, and I think you said this in not so many words as well, we're not our customer. So we can't just assume that everybody wants to be spoken to the way we'd like to be spoken to. So we got to understand where are they coming from? What's going on in their world? And really, I guess one word would kind of sum up that whole point too, and that's being respectful of the other person.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then, really we tie it all together with the last secret, if you will. But again, as you were saying, none of these are really secret, but the secrets of genuine influence. So the 5th principle, I guess we could call it, is to let go of having to be right. Now, this, is kind of an interesting one because the natural question would be, well, wait a second. We're talking about influence. Don't we want to be right? Well, of course we want to be right. And we're going to be prepared. We're going to prepare ourselves to be right. And we're going to know how to communicate in such a way as to influentially and persuasively put across our point. But what this means when we say let go of having to be right is you're letting go of your attachment to having to be right. It's sort of like the person art that we see so much today, especially in politics, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. They have a certain idea or belief, and that's it, right? That they're immutable, unchangeable. Don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is made up. And the challenge with that attitude is that you can't learn anything that way. You can never be any wiser than you already are. And typically those who feel they know it all and have all the answers typically are less wise than the person who is always open. Now, being open to another point of view doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Of course not. It just means you're open. You're open to not being 100% right. You're open to the fact that maybe you've seen things in a certain way that's not totally correct or correct at all. And when we do this, two things happen. One, we go into learner's mode. So we actually are able to bring in so much more additional information that we have a much better chance of actually being right. The other thing, though, is when we're dealing with this person we're dealing with who sees and experiences the fact that we're not just looking to be right at all costs. Certainly not at their cost or their expense. They have a lot more trust in us. They feel better about us. They know us. They like us. They trust us more. And they're much more likely to then be amenable to our ideas.
And again, as I listen to you, really so many of these points just kind of mesh together. And I'm thinking along parallel lines here, thinking again in terms of sales and objections. So, for example, when we hear an objection, instead of, again, going into defensive mode, instead thinking in terms of why would somebody say that? And then that should trigger the action of asking the questions. So instead of it triggering, I'm going to be right and I'm going to show them why I'm right with my, again, rebuttal, instead, the opposite tact is, that's interesting. There must be a reason for them for saying that. Well, let's find out what that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you say that there's one sentence that's guaranteed to prevent misunderstandings. And boy, I'm sitting on the edge of my chair. I want to hear what that is. That kind of sounds too good to be true.
Actually, this is something that you've taught and you've utilized a lot. And it has to do with, again, the stepping into the other person's shoes. It has to do with belief systems, understanding that what this other person says and what you hear aren't necessarily the same thing. And what you say and what they hear aren't necessarily the same thing. So what we always want to do is make sure that we check our premises. So let me give you the example, then we'll take it down to the actual sentence. Somebody says, somebody on your work team says, the team leader says, we've got to have, things have changed. We've got to have all our work in as soon as possible. So everybody on the team says, okay. So Wednesday, end of day. Nobody has their work in except for the team leader. So I told everybody we had to have it in as soon as possible. Well, what's as soon as possible mean though? To this person, the team leader, as soon as possible meant it needs to be in within the next couple of days. To someone else on the team, as soon as possible has always meant to them, finish what you're doing and then get this done, as soon as possible. To someone else on the team, as soon as possible means nothing. Just give it lip service and keep doing what you're doing. To someone else on the team means something else. So what we need to do is define our terms. What if someone had said to the team leader, Susan, just for my own clarification, that's the tact part, just for my own clarification, when you say as soon as possible, is there a specific day or time you're thinking of? And then she would have said, well, yes, it needs to be in Wednesday, end of day by 5:00. Boom. Now everybody knows what as soon as possible means. And it's the same when a prospective customer or client tells us something or gives us an objection or brings up something that we don't, rather than assuming we know what they mean, which we don't necessarily know, or assuming that they know what we mean by what we say, let's always define our terms. So the one question would be, Dave, just for my own clarification, when you say boom, when you say X, is there or what exactly do you mean? Or is there a specific, so we're always making sure with that one question that we're clarifying terms and we're all on the same page.
And again, it all ties in so nicely and still goes back to understanding the other person. And again, to relate it to sales, we always talk about value and let's deliver value. Well, we can surmise what value might be to someone, but we really don't know until we ask them, right? I mean, we can't engineer value in. People can only extract it out based on what they define it to be. So that's why it always gets back to asking the questions, right?
Yeah. It's funny. Richard Wildman, who's written some great books, he talks about actually, taking your client to lunch. Well, you're really good clients who keep coming back to you, refer you to others and so forth, and asking them, what is it exactly that, that we bring to you or that we do for you or the value you see that has you such a loyal and wonderful customer or referring us to others. And the reason you ask is because, again, while we think we know, we don't. And they will often tell you something that's different from what you think. And what that means is if they think that way, there's other prospective customers and clients who also might feel that way. And so it's expanding your offer. It's expanding what you're able to bring up and be able to offer that you weren't even aware of just because you're not that other person.
Exactly. Wow. Bob, this has been so awesome. And we just barely scratched the surface of things that I wanted to discuss with you. But we can't make this like a 5-hour segment. So would love to have you on again, and maybe we can get into a few other things that you discuss in the book and then just other things that you cover otherwise.
Well, I'd love that. And you've been on my podcast a couple times. I'd love to have you back on again and on one of our Facebook Lives. And I can never get enough of talking to you because I always feel like I attended a seminar every time I do.
You're too kind. Well, Bob, we actually do have one more thing that we do on every show.
Your attitude will be iron every way. You'll never feel what they say. It's the art of the sales quote of the day.
That's right. It's the quote of the day. So, Bob, could you share with us one quote that is especially meaningful for you and tell us a little bit why it's important?
Let's see, because this sort of relates to what we're talking about. I'd say that tact should never be confused with compromise. We can always speak tactfully and respectfully to others without compromising our values.
Wow, that is powerful. Good stuff. Bob, tell our audience how they can get in contact with you and how they can get more of you.
Probably the best way is just to go to The Go Giver without the hyphen, thegogiver.com. And while they're there, they can check out a bunch of the goodies we have at the site. And they can, when they scroll down a few pages, they can see a place where they can get chapters 1 and 2 of any of the books to read those first and see if they like them.
Okay, everybody, make sure you go to thegogiver.com, thegogiver.com, and most definitely get the books if you're in sales, or actually everybody's in sales. Why am I saying that? Get the Go Giver Influencer. Definitely get the original Go Giver, and heck, get them all. Get the Go Giver Leader as well. All right, Bob, thank you again so much. And everybody, thank you for joining us. Again, if you're getting value from The Art of Sales, do a favor for 2 other friends or colleagues. Send them to theartofsales.com, theartofsales.com. And if you haven't already, download download my free ebook of 501 sales tips at smartcalling.com. Smartcalling.com. Until next time, go out and make it your best sales day ever. I'm Art Sobczak.